It is the Jews, Jews, and not the men to be blamed for nothing. He then left through the piece of apron under the writing and evaporated into the myth of Jack the Ripper, this great mystery.
Dr. Jari Louhelainen, a biochemistry professor at Liverpool John Moores University, stared at his computer screen on the morning of September 7th, 2014. His hands were shaking. He pushed back from his desk, removed his glasses, and rubbed his eyes. Then he looked again. The mitochondrial DNA sequence hadn't changed. After 7 years of painstaking work on a 126-year-old blood-stained shawl, the results were finally in.
DNA from a shawl recovered at the scene of one of his crimes has incredibly found a 100% match.
And they pointed to an ancestry nobody expected. For over a century, everyone assumed Jack the Ripper had to be British, a mad surgeon from London's medical elite, a deranged artist with connections to high society. Some even believed he was a member of the royal family. But the DNA evidence on Louhelainen's screen told a completely different story. The most notorious killer in British history wasn't British at all. Louhelainen later described the moment to author Russell Edwards. "I could barely believe what I was seeing. The genetic markers were unmistakable. This wasn't some aristocrat or royal physician. This was a Polish Jewish immigrant, a refugee. The Jack the Ripper case is officially closed. That's not clickbait. It's a scientific fact published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences in March 2019. After 137 years, DNA evidence has confirmed his identity and revealed his true origins. But here's the deal. What nobody tells you is how this man, a known and violent individual, was allowed to roam free while the police were watching him the entire time. The evidence doesn't just point to a suspect, it points to a cover-up. And that revelation starts with a single piece of fabric that everyone dismissed as a... Dr. Jari Louhelainen, a biochemistry professor at Liverpool John Moores University, stared at his computer screen on the morning of September 7th, 2014. His hands were shaking. He pushed back from his desk, removed his glasses, and rubbed his eyes. Then he looked again. The mitochondrial DNA sequence hadn't changed. After 7 years of painstaking work on a 126-year-old blood-stained shawl, the results were finally in. And they pointed to an ancestry nobody expected. For over a century, everyone assumed Jack the Ripper had to be British, a mad surgeon from London's medical elite, a deranged artist with connections to high society. Some even believed he was a member of the royal family. But the DNA evidence on Louhelainen's screen told a completely different story. The most notorious killer in British history wasn't British at all. Louhelainen later described the moment to author Russell Edwards. "I could barely believe what I was seeing. The genetic markers were unmistakable. This wasn't some aristocrat or royal physician. This was a Polish Jewish immigrant, a refugee. The Jack the Ripper case is officially closed. That's not clickbait. It's a scientific fact published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences in March 2019. After 137 years, DNA evidence has confirmed his identity and revealed his true origins. But here's the deal. What nobody tells you is how this man, a known and violent individual, was allowed to roam free while the police were watching him the entire time. The evidence doesn't just point to a suspect, it points to a cover-up. And that revelation starts with a single piece of fabric that everyone dismissed as the shawl that cracked the case. The whole story comes down to one object, a stained, tattered silk shawl allegedly recovered from the scene of the Ripper's fourth victim, Catherine Eddowes, on September 30th, 1888. Acting Sergeant Amos Simpson was one of the first officers at the crime scene in Mitre Square that night. According to family accounts, he took the shawl home to his wife. She took one look at the blood-soaked fabric and refused to touch it. It sat in a box, passed down through generations, for over 100 years. For decades, most experts dismissed it as a fake. Just one more piece of Ripper memorabilia in a market flooded with them. And get this, there are entire warehouses of supposed Ripper artifacts, letters, knives, clothing. Almost all of them are garbage. But in 2007, an author and amateur detective named Russell Edwards spotted the shawl at an auction. Something about it felt different. He bought it for a few £1,000s, staking his money and his reputation on one desperate gamble. He would use technology the Victorian police couldn't even dream of. Edwards spent months tracking down Dr. Louhelainen, whose specialty was extracting genetic material from ancient degraded samples. Most scientists laughed at the idea. This was a piece of silk over 125 years old. It had been handled by police, collectors, family members, contaminated by time, by touch, by the elements. Getting anything usable from it? Basically impossible. But Louhelainen agreed to try. His team worked in a sterile lab at Liverpool John Moores University, focusing on the darkest stains. They used a technique called vacuum extraction to pull microscopic genetic material from the fibers without destroying them. They weren't looking for regular DNA. That degrades too quickly. They were hunting for mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. Here's the catch. Mitochondrial DNA is different from the DNA you typically hear about. You inherit it only from your mother. She got it from her mother, and so on, in an unbroken female line stretching back thousands of years. It doesn't recombine. It doesn't shuffle. It stays intact across generations. It's a genetic time capsule, and it's perfect for tracing ancestry. The first test was simple. Was the shawl even real? Louhelainen's team tracked down Karen Miller, a living descendant of Catherine Eddowes' sister. They took a DNA sample and compared it to the blood on the shawl. Perfect match. The shawl was authentic. It had been at the crime scene, soaked in the victim's blood. That alone sent shockwaves through the ripperology community. But then they found something else. Mixed in with the victim's DNA were other biological traces, specifically samples consistent with semen. This was the killer's genetic signature, left behind in his moment of horrific rage. Now came the final step, and it would expose an ancestry that rewrites everything we thought we knew. The ancestry nobody expected. Edwards and Louhelainen had a prime suspect, a name that appeared in the original police files, a man the detectives had been watching all along. They tracked down a living female line descendant of that suspect's sister. They obtained a DNA sample. They ran the test. Match. After 137 years, the science pointed to one man. And his ancestry isn't what you think. It wasn't a prince. It wasn't a surgeon. It wasn't a famous artist or a Freemason conspirator. His name was Aaron Kosminski, a 23-year-old Polish-Jewish immigrant who worked as a hairdresser in the heart of Whitechapel, a refugee who had fled violent persecution in Eastern Europe. Dr. David Miller, a forensic geneticist who reviewed the findings, told reporters, "The mitochondrial markers are consistent with Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry from the Polish-Russian border region. This completely upends the popular narrative. But here's the deal. Kosminski wasn't some new discovery. He was the man police suspected from the very beginning. And the real question isn't who he was. It's why they let him walk free for so long. Kosminski had fled Poland, then part of the Russian Empire, to escape the brutal pogroms. These were organized massacres targeting Jewish communities. Villages burned, families slaughtered in the streets. Thousands of traumatized refugees poured into London's East End, desperate for safety. Kosminski was one of them. By all accounts, he was deeply disturbed. Modern experts believe he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. He experienced auditory hallucinations. He had a documented hatred of women. And this isn't speculation. This is what the police at the time recorded in their own files. Chief Constable Melville McNagnon wrote an internal memo in 1894, naming Kosminski as a primary suspect. He described him as a man with a great hatred of women and strong homicidal tendencies. But the real bombshell comes from Chief Inspector Donald Swanson. He was the officer who oversaw the entire Ripper investigation. He was on the ground every single day. Years after he retired, Swanson received a copy of his superior's memoirs. In the margins, right next to the section about the Ripper case, he scribbled a private note. He wrote that the killer was Kosminski, who had been sent to an asylum where he died. Let that sink in. The lead investigator privately confirmed the killer's identity in his own handwriting. And get this, Kosminski lived right in the middle of the murder locations. He was known to be violent. In 1891, his family finally had him committed to Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum, where he remained until his death in 1919. When did the Jack the Ripper murders stop? Exactly when Aaron Kosminski was taken off the streets. The DNA, the police files, the timeline, the ancestry, everything aligns. But if they knew who he was, why didn't they arrest him? The answer involves a cover-up that changed history. The cover-up. To understand why the police let Kosminski walk free, you have to understand the nightmare world of 1888 London. And that's putting it lightly. The East End wasn't the charming city of top hats and carriages you see in period dramas. Whitechapel was one of the most desperate places on earth. Over 900,000 people crammed into a few square miles. Population density exceeded 1,000 people per acre. The streets were unlit, unpaved, and crawling with poverty. A thick yellow fog, a toxic mix of river mist and coal smoke, choked the city. Some nights, you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. Perfect conditions for a predator. The victims weren't glamorous. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly were middle-aged women in desperate poverty. They walked the streets at night, trying to earn a few pennies for a bed. They trusted the wrong man, and nobody noticed they were gone until it was too late. The police had no forensic science, no fingerprinting, no DNA analysis. Their tools were a whistle and a wooden stick, and they were fighting something else entirely. A media circus that made everything worse. Here's the catch. They did find clues, they just couldn't use them. Near Catherine Eddowes' body, police discovered a piece of her bloody apron. On the wall above it, someone had written in chalk, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Was it a message from the killer? Was Kosminski, who was Jewish, taunting the police? Or was it random anti-Semitic graffiti? We'll never know. Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren ordered the message erased immediately. He was terrified it would spark anti-Jewish riots. Tensions were already boiling between the established British population and the flood of Eastern European refugees. They washed away one of the only pieces of physical evidence they ever found, because they feared what would happen if the public discovered the killer's ancestry. It's not that simple, though. There's another layer. The infamous Dear Boss letter arrived at a London news agency, taunting the police and signing off with the name that would echo through history: Jack the Ripper. The problem? Most experts now agree it was a fake, probably written by a journalist at the Star newspaper to sell papers. But it worked. It created a media frenzy and sent investigators chasing phantom aristocrats and mad surgeons while the real killer walked among his neighbors. One letter, however, was authentic. The From Hell letter arrived with a small box containing half a preserved human kidney. Catherine Eddowes had her kidney removed by the killer. The police knew they had their suspect. But arresting a Jewish immigrant for the most sensational murders in British history, in that political climate, it could have sparked citywide violence against an entire community. So, they waited, they watched. And when Kosminski's family finally committed him to an asylum, the murders stopped. Case quietly closed. No trial, no publicity, no riots. The official files stayed sealed for decades. The controversy and the question. So that's it, right? Case closed. The DNA matches, the ancestry checks out, the timeline fits perfectly, not so fast. When Louhelainen and Edwards published their findings in the Journal of Forensic Sciences in 2019, critics came out swinging. Dr. Hansi Weissensteiner, a forensics, genetics specialist at Innsbruck Medical University, raised questions about contamination. The shawl is over 137 years old. Handled by police, collectors, family members, Edwards himself. How can we be certain the DNA isn't from someone who touched it in the last century? Other researchers pointed out that mitochondrial DNA isn't unique to individuals. It's shared by entire maternal lineages. Thousands of people could theoretically match those same markers. Louhelainen stands by his work. He used the most advanced extraction techniques available. He documented every step. The genetic markers trace back through generations to the same Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry from the Polish-Russian border. But science is about questioning everything, and some questions don't have clean answers. What we do know is this: Aaron Kosminski was the police's prime suspect from the beginning. His institutionalization matches the exact end of the murders. His ancestry explains why they might have covered it up, and DNA evidence from the crime scene points directly to his family line. The Ripper wasn't a phantom. He wasn't royalty. He wasn't a brilliant surgeon with a dark secret. He was a traumatized refugee whose shattered mind turned him into a monster. And the police let him walk free because they feared what would happen if the truth got out. Here's the question nobody wants to ask. If they covered this up in 1888, What else did they hide? And why did it take 137 years and a piece of fabric in someone's attic to finally expose the truth? Some legends aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to protect the people who created them. So, what do you think? Is the DNA the final word? Or is someone still protecting secrets that should have died with Aaron Kosminski? Drop your theory in the comments. And if this story gave you chills, hit like and subscribe, because the next mystery we uncover might hit even closer to home.